to our live stream lecture for this Labor Day, September 1st. Labor Day is September 1st. The first Monday in September is Labor Day, and welcome to our Labor Day, not only our celebration, but to our fourth live stream of the weekend. We did 3 Q&As back to back and back to back, Monday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and now we are doing our usual live stream lecture that we do on Sundays at 4 p.m. We've shifted to Monday at 4 p.m. I hope everybody's having a great Labor Day and enjoying maybe a day off, which is kind of interesting because the holiday is based in the labor movement, is obviously known as Labor Day, but of course the holiday is actually properly celebrated by picnics, parades, celebrations, barbecues, kind of seen in a ceremonial way as the end of summer. The fall season is 3 weeks away. The days are getting shorter, or days are getting shorter, nights are getting longer again. Things seem to be heading back towards balance with the solstice. You also have kids going back to school, although that's more of a thing that happens nowadays in September. Or in August. Labor Day used to be the indicating factor of when kids get back to school. They went to back to school the day after then and not before. So, got my smoking jacket in the background. I'm going to move that over because it's too hot to wear it. But hello and welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel and to our live stream lecture on this wonderful Labor Day. I hope everybody is having a great day. Hopefully you're enjoying a day off. Most people around the world do not celebrate Labor Day. It is a highly American holiday. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but those I know in Britain, they celebrate both. In Canada, they celebrate only Labor Day along with the United States. So maybe some of our Canadians are celebrating their day off. Interestingly enough, both Canada and the United States adopted Labor Day as a holiday on the same day. So hopefully you guys have heard can hear me okay. Hopefully the lighting is good and the mic's good. We've got new equipment here that we've been trying out. We've been having a fun Labor Day, 4 live streams back to back to back to back to back. And this is our live stream lecture, which we usually do on Sundays. On Fridays and Saturdays, we answer all of your questions. And then on Sundays, we lecture on a particular topic. And we're going to be talking about the origins of Labor Day, which is a day of parades, celebration, picnics, and awareness for workers' rights and workers' struggles, which is kind of the American version, more or less, of May Day, which is the International Workers' Work Day, which is celebrated on May 1st throughout much of the Western world, as well as in Africa and South America. So we're going to be taking a look at that. We've got several people here who are from all over the world. We have people from India and Canada. So, yes, let me see here. So everyone, hello Gayahan, hello Hars. Hars has put the social media handles in the chat, so please follow them. I wrote a Substack article this day that wasn't that disingenuous and wasn't that bad about Labor Day, so you can learn that. If you want to read the history of Labor Day, you can check that out. I have a long-form video coming out that gives details and information that won't be on the lecture, but the lecture obviously is exclusive, so check out the video. I have long-form videos dropping every Monday and Friday, and this one is about Labor Day. It comes out at 8 p.m. Eastern, so really looking forward to that. Rakesh, hello. Gayahan, good to see you. Harry and Hars holding down the chat, and Solomon's here too. We've got some of my best moderators. Make sure to like the live and subscribe for more. Becoming a friendly neighborhood historian is as easy as liking and subscribing. We just passed the 9,500 threshold for subscribers. I'm so grateful to all of you. We are slowly approaching 10,000. If you want to donate to the channel or become a member, anything helps the channel grow, and all the money that you give is used to make the content that we produce that much better for all of you. So a very happy Labor Day. Bienvenue to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, where we do history in a neighborly, communal manner, in a amicable manner, and it's good to see everybody around. So we'll get into the lecture in a minute. Let's see here. The reason I got it is because there were no mods for the first 15 minutes to do. There was about 10 trolls and other idiots. I needed Harry and Hars to be moderators. The channel's been going on for about a year and a half, and we've been doing the live streams for just over a year. We have Simon the Bunny, who does such a great job, and then Harry and Hars are kind of the second generation of moderators who have come in and done a great job as well handling the chat. Let me see. I would subscribe every day. Well, you're so kind and no way affiliated. It's great to see you. Again, like the live if you're enjoying the content and everything. And yeah, we'll talk about the history of Labor Day. It's not going to be a super long lecture. It's comparable in some ways to my Industrial Revolution lecture and my Industrial Revolution video, which you guys could go out and check out. And I think you guys would really, really enjoy. This is obviously part of my Industrial Revolution series that I'm doing. This is a members only series that I'm doing here on YouTube. I've already done the first video. That's open for general access, but if you become a member, you'll get access to the other videos when they drop. This Labor Day video will be one of those. This Labor Day live stream lecture is part of it. So all of this is connected to what I'm doing when talking about the Industrial Revolution. I have a live stream lecture about the Industrial Revolution. And obviously, you can't have Labor Day, you can't have the labor movement without modern industry and without the modern industrial revolution. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that here. So there definitely will be overlap to previous content that I've made. Please go check that out when you can. I would really appreciate it. Again, a happy Labor Day to everybody, and to everybody who's not celebrating Labor Day, maybe you're going to have a happy May Day in May. Some of you, like the Brits, will be celebrating both. So, yes, I'm not wrong about that. He mitigate his negatives to prop up any credit we can give him. What? Okay, then. So, all right. So basically, Labor Day is celebrated on the first Monday of September in the United States and in Canada. I believe Canada celebrates it on the exact same day. Australia and Japan are two other countries that celebrate Labor Day exclusively. Britain celebrates both Labor Day and May Day, and the vast majority of the world, like I mentioned before, celebrates May Day, and we'll talk about those. Interestingly enough, Labor Day actually precedes May Day, despite the fact that most of the world, including the Western world, celebrates May Day over Labor Day. But we'll talk about all of that. So the Industrial Revolution, as I've talked about on this channel a lot in both videos and in live streams, starts in the late 18th, early 19th century. The development of a textile industry in Great Britain, the need for mechanized labor, high demand, and new inventions like the spinning jenny, and other things make it much more convenient and much easier to mass produce textile goods in factories than to produce it in families or in guilds or in small businesses. So factories become more and more common in England. Eventually, Samuel Slater brings this to Lowell, Massachusetts. He kind of copies and pastes the model of the British Industrial Revolution into the United States. Britain is able to do it because they're kind of isolated from the European continent. They also have vast trade networks in places like India and Africa that are very helpful, and they have more colonies than anyone else at the time. The Americans kind of catch up quickly in the 1820s. France will catch up, and Germany in the middle of the century, and it won't be until the late 1800s that Russia and Italy start industrializing at the same rate as the British and the Americans. But the Americans, interestingly enough, for being a brand new country, perhaps because they're in the Angloid sphere, start industrializing relatively soon after the British. After the War of 1812 and during the era of James Monroe, the era of good feelings as it's known, the American industry starts to pick up, particularly in New England. This leads to the production of new factories. Factories originally focused on textiles, but metallurgy, jewelry making, furniture making, appliance making all become extremely important with new inventions. The Bessemer press makes it easier to produce steel. Steel is far more durable and much better for building an infrastructure, so steel plants become quite common. Coal is eventually used to burn fuel. You have the steam revolution with the steamship and later the locomotive becoming popular in the United States in the middle of the 19th century. So factories and mines prop up all over the northern states, especially for these things. The South remains a plantation agrarian-based economy that relies heavily on cash crops like cotton and tobacco, and of course on slavery. Whereas the North, which has already kind of abolished slavery, gets into in the Industrial Revolution. And there's really an argument that could be made that industrialization, and by the way, I'm not interacting with the chat as much as I usually do. I hope everybody behaves themselves. I'm so glad to see you here on our Labor Day. Hopefully you're enjoying the new lighting, the formal wear, and all the other stuff and what I'm talking about. But I will maybe have time to answer questions at the end. We'll see what happens. But basically, because the North is interested in industry and interested in building factories and urbanization, there's far less of a need for slavery. It's an interesting historical debate of a cart and a horse of, was industrialization what made people say they didn't need slavery anymore, or did people get rid of slaves and then turn towards industrialization? I tend to side with the former camp. Great Britain is already well on its way to industrialization when it abolishes the slave trade before any other European power in the 1830s. And despite the fact that there is slavery rampant in many parts of America, the North clearly becomes more populous, more industrialized, and more urbanized because it relies less on slavery and more on mechanized labor, which is filled with low-wage workers who come from the countryside, but eventually many of them come from other countries. First from Germany and Scandinavia in the 1820s and 30s. However, in the 1840s, the potato famine in Ireland is going to bring millions of immigrants to Ireland in the 1850s and 60s who are going to live in cities and start working in these factories and establish their neighborhoods. The factories are cramped, their conditions are poor, lighting is bad, there's no electric lights at the time, although electric lights are an invention of the Industrial Revolution, which will make it easier for them to see the areas around them. The truth of the matter is, what else happens? You've got laborers working in cramped conditions for low wages. You have women working, getting lower pay than men. You have children working. You have people moving from the countryside into the cities. You have the development for neighborhoods and tenements in these areas. They're often overcrowded. There's often families of 10 living in areas, families of 5 or 6 with high birth rates because they don't have a lot of wealth, which is actually a correlation in human history. The more wealth a generation has, the more wealth a particular group tends to have, the less children they tend to have. But you don't have the 2 parents and 2 children. You usually have 2 parents and 3 or 4 children. The more children you have, the more laborers you have, the more money you can make. But you have large families, several families of 4 or 5 people living in conditions that are really suited for 5 or 6 people overall. This is common in many of the cities like Philadelphia, Boston, and New York. And it will be common for the Irish immigrants and then the second wave of immigrants, which comes at the end of the century. Many of them are Italian, Jewish, Russian, Polish, Greek. And in the West Coast, there's a lot of immigrants coming from Asia, China, and Japan who will suffer similar conditions working in megacities like San Francisco and Seattle. So the growth and urbanization of cities is to meet the demands of the factories. The factory owners tend to become very wealthy. The wages and livelihood is considered to be better by most of the workers, but they are not substantially better than it was before. And obviously, they are suffering from working 10 to 12-hour shifts routinely while getting very low wages, and they don't have much time off. There isn't really much of a semblance of a weekend. Going to church is obviously an extremely important thing for this society on Sundays, but other than that, you are working in the factories. There's no electric lights, so the lighting is very bad. Machines are not always reliable. People are in charge of running and operating these machinery. These different types of machinery tend to have different accidents and problems occur to them, which leads to all sorts of suffering. Mining is extremely deadly. Men and young boys particularly mine heavily. Mining coal can be disastrously unhealthy for your lungs. There isn't an environmental protection agency. There are very few environmental and safety conditions or restrictions. Workplace safety is not it doesn't have a huge importance now then that it does now. So you have kind of a mixed bag. You have laborers getting more opportunities, making more money, and finding a new way to live for them and their families. You have immigrants being able to start to make a life for themselves in America. The vast majority of them prefer this to the way they lived in Europe. And we do have a very low recidivism rate where they go back to Europe after being in the United States for a while. Men typically tend to come first and live in the cities and work in these industries first, and then eventually the women will come with them. Yes, so you've got the development of mechanized labor. You have the development of an industrialized society. And this is really mainly taking place in the northern states. The southern states tend to be plantation-based. The western states tend to be less developed, less urbanized. California will pick up quickly because of the San Francisco gold rush and other things like that. But generally, more often than not, California, the northeastern coast of the United States, all the way into the Midwest, tends to be where you will find the production of steel and coal. Coal mining, steel production, these things become critical to major cities in the United States, you have textiles, you have metallurgy, you have jewelry, you have the production of all these sorts of fabrics, you have the production of rail lines, locomotive engines. All of these things are being made in factories because they're a lot quicker and easier to make in factories than in different areas. You don't have an assembly line where you have a specialization and stratification of labor later on, and you have very little incentive for these different factory owners to actually pay their laborers well. So because of that, you have a lack of incentive for factory owners to actually pay adequate wages. And this becomes a huge argument between Northerners and Southerners. Northerners who are against slavery in the South, and Southerners who are arguing against what they call wage slavery. The argument made by Southerners during the abolitionist movement is that immigrants and laborers in factories are paid horrible wages. They are not provided food. They are not guaranteed housing by their employers. However, we guarantee our slaves housing. We just don't pay them. And so this becomes a back and forth between the differences between what they call wage slavery in the North, working in factories for dirt poor wages, versus slavery in the South, which is obviously the forced labor of African Americans. However, the irony in all of this is that the mechanized, industrialized centers in the North are able to produce equipment, weaponry, and everything else needed for proper transportation and the proper production of ammunition and weapons that will become extremely important during the Civil War. So part of the North's advantage in the Civil War is not just that it has a much larger population, which is partly because of all those immigrants coming to all of these cities to work in these factories, but also because you have these factories in the first place that can produce weapons at a much greater scale than in the South. There are some factories in some of the urban centers of the South, but the South is far behind the North in every major metric of industrialization in 1860. There are more railroads, there are more ironclad. Initially, the South has a few more ironclad warships than the North, but the North quickly catches up and surpasses them. This allows the Northern Navy, led by great naval commanders like David Farragut, to basically create a blockade of southern ports, which will help starve the South into submission near the end of the war. Trains and locomotives make it easier for Northern troops to move back and forth, and the South, despite fighting a defensive war, sees the suffering of their ill-equipped, under-industrialized society versus the Northern Army. And of course, you've got the advancement of rifles and rifles and things like this. And I'm trying to think of the Winchester rifle, for instance, becomes quite popular during the Civil War because you now all of a sudden can mass produce weapons that are a lot more efficient and can fire a lot more than muskets from the past. So there's a lot of advancements that the North is able to not monopolize but dominate that allows them to have the advantage over and against the South. Okay, can we stop arguing in the chat because you guys are distracting me? Can we go one day without Hassan and Harry tearing each other up? Sorry. Anyways, so the North wins the war because it's far more populous than the South. It's far more industrialized than the South. And Lincoln basically uses the industrialization, as do his generals, to crush the South at every turn possible, transporting weapons and armor to destroy as much of the South as possible. Obviously, the Civil War is one of the first wars to use machine gunnery, which is also a creation of the Industrial Revolution. The Gatling gun becomes extremely popular, although it's not all over the fields like cannons and muskets are, or rifles. So what happens next? Well, I'm glad you asked. The Civil War ends. People from the North start moving to the South and building factories and pushing industrialization. Although sharecropping becomes the dominant socioeconomic practice of Southerners, factories and industry do start coming into the South, and thanks to the construction of railroads, which are themselves a product of the Industrial Revolution, the Transcontinental Railroad finished in 1869, for instance, you have railroads that are able to move goods and materials and equipment across the country. This leads to the buildup of other cities and other urban areas where you see a similar pattern of people moving from the countryside into the cities to start working in urbanized areas. So the development of cities in other parts of the United States is mainly due to the prosperity and the availability of the railroad. So you have basically not a vicious cycle, but a cycle of building where you build equipment for the railroads, you build rail lines. Then you all of a sudden have the ability to transport goods and people more efficiently. That allows you to build up urban centers much more quickly. It also allows people to transport from the urban centers to other areas if they have the wealth to do so. An emerging group of people who actually have created a substantial amount of wealth for themselves are eventually able to move out of the cities and move into areas around the cities, using local transportation like the electric line or trains to travel into the cities, and this leads to the development of the suburbs. So this is just a quick overview of all the Industrial Revolution and all the factors of the Industrial Revolution going on in the mid to late 19th century, which was already starting to happen in the North, but then eventually really takes grips and really starts to be seen throughout the country, particularly in the South and the West, during the 1870s and 80s. However, once again, workers are paid low wages. Immigrants are mistreated. People are not safe. Children are working laborious hours. Black lung is affecting children and men who work in mines. Workplace accidents are horrendous. New inventions make things easier. Hydraulic mining and electrical lights will make working in mines and in factories, respectively, safer and cleaner. Neighborhoods will eventually start to be cleaned up. Immigrant groups will start to, in the second and third generations, especially since coming to the United States, will be able to gather generational wealth and will be able to move out of the cities into those suburbs that I just talked about, and the new generation of immigrants will come into these areas and live in the old tenements and slums. So there's more and more opportunities, economic and social opportunities. It's not like it's just completely impossible to move up and you're just a rung on the ladder who will make dirt poor wages forever for a rich, wealthy robber baron. That's an over-exaggeration of what happens. However, you do have the development of a huge level of income inequality that has not been seen before in history between the captains of industry, the robber barons, over and against the rest of the population. About 87% of the wealth by the 1880s is owned by about 15% of the population. Now, this isn't just every single robber baron. This includes managers, foremen, resource and development people, people of high-ranking positions in these factories tend to make more and more money. And these people obviously came from nothing, so it's not impossible to have social mobility. But movements in the United States, the workers' movement and the progressive movement, believe that social mobility is extremely difficult, and if you don't, and it'd be hard to move up on the rungs on the ladder in the different fields of industry. And if you do, you are risking your life every day with workplace accidents. You do not have you do not have clean areas to produce clean uh, goods and materials, which makes food supplies tainted, for instance. Um, Basically, you have a very unsafe and unsteady line of work, and they are going to find fault with this and say that there needs to be even more reforms and there needs to be more accountability so that these places aren't complete messes and so that workers actually have a chance to move up in the world. And they're going to gain a lot of attention after the Civil War, particularly in the late 1870s, as America moves away from dealing with Reconstruction and rebuilding the Old South and starts to focus on the economic prosperity, yet also all of these social questions that are brought about because of hyper-industrialization, which is now seen all across the entire nation. So the United States has entered an industrial revolution after its second political revolution, the Civil War, and it is now more focused on economic growth. The government tends to favor these robber barons and captains of industry, tends to give them a lot of free passes on things because they love the amount of wealth that they produce. A lot of politicians are in the back pockets of these different corporations and industries, but also at the same time, they believe that this is an adequate way for people to live and that this is what it takes to become not only a full-blooded American for an immigrant, but also a successful American. If you want to work hard, you're going to have to suffer and sweat a little bit, and so who cares if your working conditions aren't always that safe? Now, to be fair, there are plenty of people who call for reform starting in the 1870s and onwards. However, they tend to be at the fringe of both political parties, as both political parties tend to kind of struggle with this issue. The Republicans, for their part, are focused on civil service and governmental reform in the 1880s. However, they tend to be more of the party of big business. They definitely have a rapport, a strong rapport with the captains of industry. Presidents like Benjamin Harrison and William McKinley will be backed heavily by captain of industry money, whereas Democratic presidents tend to be a little bit more grassroots and based on individual on individual needs. However, the Democratic Party is still wrestling with this idea of being a hyper individualistic party like it had been throughout all of the 19th century. So presidents like Grover Cleveland aren't going to do as much good for the common man as people might suspect. Um, Labor movements, organized labor obviously changes the entire narrative surrounding all of this. The rise of two major labor movements, the Knights of Labor and the American Federation of Labor, which will eventually, I think, combine. I'm pretty sure it's the two of them that combine to form the AFL-CIO. Also, the roots of the SEIU and other unions are created at this time, where basically the main argument from these labor unions is collective bargaining, the right of the workers to protest and strike whenever they need to in order to get the just compensation, the better hours, the better working conditions, and the safety guarantees that they didn't have before. Now, a lot of people will say you can thank unions and laborers for the weekend and for prosperity and for minimum wage. This isn't fully true. You can't. There's always, as with any huge historical change, there's always a plethora of factors that go into what actually happened. It is true that the demands of organized labor eventually were able to serve as the neck, turning the head of the American public to sympathize with them, leading to calls for greater and greater reforms. The progressive movement was this behemoth of different movements like the labor movement, the women's rights movement, the temperance movement, the national parks movement. There's all sorts of movements that kind of form this behemoth called the jigsaw puzzle called the progressive movement, which is going to advocate for better rights for people and for government intervention to help soothe the ills of the general public. And this is actually going to become more and more popular in the late 19th century and is going to actually get somewhere with success. The way they do it is through popular protest. So labor unions tend to go on strikes. Strikes are considered illegal. The government isn't a fan of them at first. However, they're going to gain some sort of legitimacy and popularity during the 1880s, and Labor Day is actually where this starts. So the American Federation for Labor, I think it's them, or it's the Knights of Labor, in 1882 organized a protest of 10,000 workers in New York City who walk off of a job, do not get paid for the day, with no guarantees, and there's no paid time off, there's no vacation pay, there's no minimum wage. They work for, it's a right to work agreement. They go into the streets and have this large protest and parade in 1882, and this is seen as the first celebration of Labor Day. It's a giant parade. That's why parades, especially done by organized labor, continue to this day, every Labor Day in the United States. Protests, by the way, in the 1870s in Canada had usually centered around, of all days, April 15th, for when laborers would go out into the streets and protest for their rights. So the labor movement in Canada was a little bit of ahead of the American labor movement at this particular time. So what happens next? Throughout the rest of the 1880s, these Labor Day celebrations are held. It was originally done on Tuesday, September 5th in 1882 in New York City. 10,000 laborers marching, demanding better rights, better pay, and safer conditions. These are the usual rights that they will demand, and it's the usual issue, and it's usually protests against the factory worker, against the factory owners and things like this. The captains of industry who run monopolies and trusts, which have basically amassed all of the wealth, wherein a monopoly controls the sale of one particular good, meaning that they can set any price they want, and if you want to use that good or service, you have to pay them no matter what, as well as the trusts, which own all of the different fields of research, development, production, and selling of a particular item. Those are both extraordinarily common at this time. Steel, run by Andrew Carnegie, is one of the biggest trusts. Standard Oil becomes one of the biggest trusts in producing petroleum and also selling it to the American people. So the way that you sell oil is not that you and oil is extremely important for heating at the time. So is coal. You basically have captains of industry dominating the trade, sell, and control of not just their good, but all the ancillary products and services related to their main good. So there's monopolies in the railroad industry. Vanderbilt does his thing there. You've got Carnegie, who is an immigrant, who was dirt poor, who is extremely philanthropic. There is something that must be said. These captains of industry were some of the most generous humans in human history, and they could definitely afford to do so because they believe, Rockefeller, running Standard Oil, they believe in the need for giving back, but also of providing resources and access so that people might be able to do what they were once able to do, and improving the world. And they definitely have the wealth to throw around. Rockefeller, who's often considered one of the most greedy of all of these men, was extremely invested in research and development for the uses of different types of petroleum, including petroleum jellies, which we get Vaseline from, to help people medically and with heating and things like this. So there definitely is a selfish greed motive for every single one of these major capitalists, but there's also a motive towards charity and towards making the society around them better and to improving their lot. Eventually, the captains of industry will contribute themselves to the creation of better wages and conditions for their workers, not just through government compulsion and protests and strikes from workers, but also through against their subsidiaries, because they don't own every single last company and every single last factory. They have subsidiaries, foremen, and different people who represent them who have interest in different steel factories, rail lines, coal mines all throughout the country. So they've definitely got their fingers in a bunch of different pies. They will also, through voluntary motives, become interested in making conditions better for their workers so that their workers stay with them, so that they don't strike, and so that they also have workers who are reliable and working towards a goal. They basically learned that incentivizing their workers is a huge way to not only continue to produce good products, but to continue to produce good workers. Ford is the one who perhaps perfects this, and through stratifying labor, and basically creating labor classification and specialization through the assembly line, Ford is not only able to increase efficiency, but also prove that by increasing efficiency, you actually have less time. If you can actually work less and produce more, and if you overwork your workers, they will be less efficient. So he actually starts instituting 8-hour workdays, a more decent wage, capital deepening, incentivizing his employees, making it easier for people to move up the corporate ladder and improve their lot through specialization of different labor based on what part of the assembly line you're working on. So I'm not praising them, I'm not glorifying them. There's plenty of wrong with all of the robber barons. My point is that they also have a part to play, and I have to be historically honest, in how capital deepening, incentivization, and all sorts of other things did what they could to make labor more, to make their products better, to make their workers better, and to improve their lot. Some of this was from compulsion. Some of this was from wanting to keep their laborers happy and keep their factories open. What happens next? Well, let's get back to the Labor Day side of it. So Knights of Labor, American Federation of Labor, all of these movements are pushing, usually through peaceful protests and demonstrations, strikes, and basically trying to grind businesses and production in particular areas to a halt to get attention to their causes. Basically saying we won't work until our causes are met. Again, the government is somewhat sympathetic to the corporations and to the businesses, and the labor movement isn't always its own best friend, as it has some pretty radical elements that are going to push for violence and riot and revolution to actually achieve their goals. Communism is becoming a more and more popular theory in Europe. The socialism and things and anarchy are going to couple with it in America. One of the most disastrous results of the labor movement turning violent is the Haymarket riot at Haymarket Square in Boston in 1886. Do I have the image for that? Where is the image for that? It's like one of the most famous images. Give me 1 second. I will find it. Hope you're enjoying this. If you are, please like and subscribe. Become a friendly neighborhood historian. It's as easy as all of that. You can follow the social media handles in the chat to learn more. Where is it? I do have it here. I thought I did. Where is it? It's one of the most famous pictures or paintings in American history. I don't have it. That's very odd that I don't have it. Is it this one? No, that's not it. We'll just go with this one. A nice labor image. People working in a factory producing, it looks like metal, it looks like wheels. So basically the Haymarket riot, these protests turned violent. The police come in to crush the riot. Somebody throws a bomb. I think 8 policemen are killed. That leads to an uproar. The public turns against the labor movement somewhat, but there's still protests and riots. Strikes will bring any form of industry to a halting grind. Workers and unions tend to intimidate, threaten, and fight with scabs who are brought in to replace the workers. Political organizations are trying to drum up support for particular candidates from unions. And this is where the unions get a reputation as being a political agent as much as an economic agent. Eventually, during the 20th century, the labor unions are going to lose a lot of their popularity because of dealings with organized crime and other interests in order to keep scabs away from their jobs and to intimidate factory owners and business owners who will also in turn use their connections to intimidate in the government to intimidate and force workers back onto the assembly lines and back into the factories. So there's a lot of different back and forth about all of this. What happens next? The labor movement continues to push along. It's obviously taken a hit. A lot of people are kind of outraged about what's going on. There's a growing sympathy for the harsh conditions that laborers have to face in the general public, and there's this growing attitude that the American government under presidents like Benjamin Harrison and Grover Cleveland are not doing enough to actually properly provide for workers in this difficult time for them. And although there are signs of things improving, of a middle class emerging, there isn't enough being done to actually secure their rights, to get children in schools and out of the workforces, to guarantee women the right to work, but also the right to stay home. Women who are part of the middle class are creating cults of domesticity, so they're not working as much as men are. Women who are working typically tend to be paid lower because they're not seen as the primary providers like their male counterparts. There's a lot going on, basically. The next major strike that brings attention and basically brings Labor Day into the general focus, although it's still practiced through parades and picnics and all sorts of demonstrations for workers' rights. It's not as much of a joyous ceremonial holiday like it is nowadays. Then you don't see barbecues and things like that and flag waving. It's less patriotic and more about workers getting what they deserve. It's become more patriotic as America has realized the importance of labor in its history. So what happens next? Well, the 1894 Pullman strike brings everything to a head when it comes to the history of Labor Day. Basically, Pullman was one of the wealthiest rail car. George Pullman had created a rail car company that had mainly hired African Americans at first, but basically wanted people who were proper porters and servants to work on railway lines, helping passengers and things like that. Because of the failure of cut wages were actually cut by the industry. The rail car porters start to protest and eventually strike a big general strike where you have workers from all over the different areas. This is one of the reasons unions pressure all members of a particular industry to join, because then if they strike, everybody strikes, and if they get an increase in wages and conditions, everybody gets an increase in wages and conditions. regardless of what people think about or care. This is one of the other things that's later going to lead to a lot of pressure on and antagonism towards unions, especially in the modern day. However, unions at the time are very good at organizing all of the workers in a particular field to, for lack of a better word, unite and protest a particular petition, protest, and picket for better rights, better working conditions, and better wages. The demand for shorter hours and better wages for the rail car workers leads to the railroad industry in the area basically grinding to a halt. This obviously is a threat to commerce. It's a threat to transportation. It is a danger to an American economy that is already suffering from a panic. So President Grover Cleveland, who is again a very pro-business president, sends in federal troops in 1894 to quell the riots. In the midst of the fighting and the riots, I think this is in Pennsylvania, a bunch of rioters are killed. And all of a sudden, the pendulum swings against the government as all of a sudden people are outraged at the actions of the government and show a lot of sympathy to the dead railcar workers. Eventually, the strike is resolved. The workers go back. I believe their wages were increased. Strikes are successful at this. What unions definitely want is collective bargaining, the ability of workers to gather together and make certain demands and have those demands met and have negotiations go back and forth whenever they deem necessary. So Cleveland and many others in the American government decide that it's time to show overtones or make overtones to the workers and to their plight. But they don't do this through any sort of, here's Grover Cleveland, by the way, who's most famous for being the first president to win non-consecutive terms. But they do, but not actually through enforcing antitrust legislation like the Sherman antitrust legislation, or through doing anything else, but through providing ceremonial overtones to the workers, to show that the American government has at least a superficial understanding of their plight and sympathy towards what they are doing. And this leads to the creation of Labor Day. In May of 1894, legislation is passed and signed into law that makes the first Monday of September Labor Day. So the first Labor Day is celebrated only 12 years after the original holiday was first celebrated unofficially as a parade by the Knights of Labor in New York City. So basically, that's where Labor Day comes from. It becomes a holiday. As the labor movement gains more and more attention, eventually reforms do start to come in, and we talked about this during the live stream lecture from last week, but of course, under President Theodore Roosevelt, there's definitely a better understanding of the needs for and the rights of laborers and workers. There's enforcing of antitrust legislation. There's regulations on workplaces to promote workplace safety and all sorts of other things. So the progressive era definitely kicks up a notch, and definitely under President Theodore Roosevelt is finally gets a president who is willing to stand with it and fight for workers' rights and better conditions for laborers, better wages, developments in technology make it easier. And basically, the labor movement wins one victory after another during the first half of the 20th century. Eventually, minimum wage, unemployment insurance, and Social Security all provide more padding and armor for workers and their long-term needs and requests, especially in the downturn of the Great Depression when they are first brought into law by Roosevelt's cousin, Franklin Roosevelt. So there's a lot going on with changes. In the early 20th century, presidents tend to be more progressive. They tend to be more focused on workers' rights. Workers tend to get better benefits. Capital deepening happens. You have the assembly line making it easier for workers to move up. You have a development of new technologies that make workplaces safer, but also more demanding, but also means that the labor is paid better. Obviously, the automobile industry makes it a lot brings a better a need that is filled by the American worker in places like Detroit and Chicago. African Americans move north to work in factories. Immigration stalls in the 1920s. These change the way that labor and unions are understood and how they function. They become more of an established bureaucratic state within the American economic, socioeconomic sector. And because of the American labor movement basically getting what it needed, Labor Day, which started out as a holiday celebrated by laborers demanding rights, and then was ceremoniously and probably very superficially made a holiday by Grover Cleveland in 1894 just to show overtones to a labor movement that he did not otherwise heavily benefit. Labor Day becomes a more docile and ceremonial holiday, more of a celebration of, yes, the acknowledgement of what workers have done for the United States, but becomes less of a superficial holiday and more of an intentional holiday, but not one that is very serious. It's not like there's a serious, at least some people would argue, there's not as much of a serious emphasis on labor reform throughout the 20th century as there was in the latter part of the 19th and early part of the 20th century. So by the time you get to the end of the 20th century, Labor Day has taken on a more ceremonial approach. It's superficial once again, but not in a, oh yeah, here's your holiday, go away, but more of the, yeah, recognize workers, without knowing the history and background of why Labor Day is important and why Labor Day matters. People tend to look at Labor Day as the end of the summer. Students used to only go back to school after Labor Day. Now it's usually before Labor Day. But Labor Day is seen as kind of this liminal point between the end of summer and the beginning of fall, even though there's 3 more weeks of summer technically. So the whole point of all of this is to show that Labor Day has changed from being a holiday of protest to a holiday of celebration to now more of a ceremonial holiday that has other applications that have really kind of forgotten its history as a labor holiday, a day to celebrate labor. Whereas May Day, which was celebrated for the first time 4 years after Labor Day in 1886, has remained much more focused on the needs of laborers throughout the world. Part of this is because it's celebrated in less developed countries where industrialization has been slower, and so there is and so the fights and the battles of the late 19th and early 20th century in the American labor movement are happening in areas like Africa and South America more often now than they are happening in the United States. So nowadays, Labor Day is seen as the end of summer. There is definitely some sort of acknowledgement of the importance of labor and the labor movement and unionization in American history, but it is not the holiday showing the importance of labor reform that it was in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And perhaps in some ways, like I said before, it's become a superficial holiday it's become more superficial the way Americans celebrate it, which is ironic because it started off as kind of a superficial acknowledgement of workers' rights, with kind of this hope that if we just give them a holiday, maybe some of our problems will go away. Grover Cleveland obviously underestimated the American worker, who turned heavily against the Democratic Party in 1896 because of this. So, anyways, that's a basic summary of how Labor Day works. And I really appreciate you listening to today's live stream lecture. We went about 35 minutes discussing the history of one of America's most well-known holidays, but now you know a little bit about the background of Labor Day, of how it actually works and where it actually comes from, and why it became a holiday. And it's interesting that it took only 12 years for Labor Day to go from being just the celebration of workers by and for and of workers to being a federal holiday with Grover Cleveland in 1894. And yes, the first Monday in September. Canada in 1894 also made Labor Day a holiday. So pretty fascinating stuff there. Hope you really enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. And yes, we will do about 20 minutes of Q&A since we got through all of that. I really appreciate you guys checking out our live stream lecture. Check out our video. Read my article on Substack about Labor Day. Get different feels. There's different facts and information in each one of them. We've got our video at 8 p.m. Eastern on Labor Day. And we have our Substack article, and there's shorts that I've been putting up here and on TikTok where you can get exclusive content you can't get here on YouTube about Labor Day. So, yes. And the historian will answer. I hope so. And you all are historians because you're all joining me right now. And if you like and subscribe, you can become a friendly neighborhood historian. It's as easy as that. So sad when a streamer is quite an intellectual, but his moderators are arguing with each other like stupid kids. Okay. I'm going to just look through this argument really fast because it's starting to really, usually it doesn't bother me and I just let you guys go at it, but then I ask you to stop and you keep doing it. And that bugs me. I mean, if this weekend has proven anything to me, it has proven that sometimes that a historian has no respect in his own YouTube channel, apparently. I don't understand why people are arguing. I don't get it. People are allowed to argue. I don't mind people going back and forth in the chat, but it can be distracting for people who are just joining us. It gives a bad, sour impression, especially when a moderator is getting into it. So I don't understand what's going on. I don't want to read through all of it. I said to stop, and it kept going on. So I don't even know what to say at this point. I'm not going to be triggered by it. I'm not going to go dark, friendly neighborhood history, but yes. Yes. People say chivalry died at Agincourt. When was chivalry born? Chivalry was the code of conduct produced by the church for knights and warriors during the Middle Ages. And it really is something of a high Middle Ages. It's kind of when you have the social stratification of the feudal system in the 7th, 8th, 9th centuries, and you begin the development of feudalism. At first, lords enforce their taxes and the paying of goods by their peasants and their serfs through force, and eventually the church steps in and says, no, you can't have that. The men who who protect your lands and enforce your rules need to be pleasant, need to be honorable, need to be honest, they can't be thugs. And that's where chivalry comes from. They need to not mistreat women, not abuse them, not do other things. So yeah. Um, Let me see here. Progressive policies wouldn't have happened without labor union riots. Possibly, yes. There's definitely some truth to that, Tom. It's one of those things where, for me, it's an amalgamation of things. I don't want to give too much to labor, and I don't want to give too much to the robber barons. I think that you have this mix of the needs of the invisible hand of the market and the intervention of government and the demands of people causing reform. This is what Theodore Roosevelt understood. Despite being a conservative who liked capitalism, Roosevelt understood that if capitalism was not, if you could not, if you could not have any intervention, then capitalism would itself turn into something that wasn't capitalism. And monopolies are not capitalistic. And he kind of, I would argue, fought for capitalism, but in a more indirect way with his regulations. Thanks for you to love to Historia regards. Thank you for joining us from Colombia. We have people who join us from all over the world. It's always great to see. Friendly history. Can you tell me why to you it isn't fair to take an overwhelmingly negative facts of Woodrow Wilson and then say his presidency was the worst than others? You can take negative, overwhelming facts about Woodrow Wilson. I know you certainly do. Did he cause a civil war? Did his stupidity ruin Reconstruction? That's Andrew Johnson. That's James Buchanan. That, for me, those things are two of the worst examples of presidencies in American history. That's why I put him below them. And I also understand that the vast majority of historians aren't even as harsh on him as I am. The vast majority of historians like Woodrow Wilson. Why do you think that is, harsh? Why do you think that the vast majority of historians, American historians, are fans of Woodrow Wilson and think he was a great president? I don't. But I don't think he was terrible. Nobody mentions the Dutch contribution to the Civil War. I don't know much about what the Dutch did during the Civil War, other than the fact that there were a lot of Dutch Americans living in New York because the Dutch had once owned New York, like the Roosevelt family. Nobody mentions the Serbian contribution to the U.S. war. Still don't know much about that. Why did the U.S. really screw over the French with all of the loans and support they gave you? Huh? They refused to pay them. The French had a revolution. Their government collapsed. It's kind of hard to pay back a government who's collapsed. And then the Americans bought land from the French. I don't know. Why did the French screw over the Americans by not paying back their loans from the Second World War, the Great War, what you call the Great War, World War I? Do you think trade unions have been beneficial to the working people in history? Absolutely. I think they have. I think that they've gotten a bad rap, and some of that is self-inflicted, and some of that is conservative, reprisal under presidents like Reagan. But I do think that the trade unions have done more good to help workers than to hurt them. I think it's a better thing that they exist for the worker than if they don't. And that's what I said in the lecture. So yes. The vast majority of historians like to rank presidents off of a good, jolly story. A president has not to be honest, but to get people to understand easier and have more popularity. I don't know if that's fully true. I don't know if that's fully true. In fact, I know it's not true. You don't know that much history. Channel should be called just friendly grifting. Yes, Uncle Incel, what do I not know about history? You aren't too different than the common way of presidential rankings of good stories to tell about them for popularity and easiness. Except that I go into detail. I look at warts and all of U.S. presidents. I talk about all of their problems. I talk about all of their challenges. I look at them from a personal way. Do I get jingoistic talking about certain American presidents who I think do a pretty good job? Yes. But I don't think that it's unfair to talk about the fun stories of Abraham Lincoln or George Washington. Do you think the Russian sale of Alaska was one of the biggest fumbles in history? I don't think the Russians would have ever developed Alaska like the Americans did. Yeah. So, anyways, I don't know what to say. So yeah, incel. Why am I a grifter? I'm still waiting for the example. The French did pay back their loans, U.S. loans from the Great War, as those loans were underwrote by the British government, and we collected money from France to ensure loans were repaid. Yes, and so thanks to us and our money, you guys won the war. My point exactly. Does it really matter that the French government collapsed and the U.S. did not pay back its loans from the French Revolution when it literally bought from the victor of that revolution, Napoleon, half of the United States? Of course, should they have paid back the loans? Yeah, absolutely. Did they pay it back in another way? Yes. Do you find it weird that at the same time the progressive era occurred, the eugenics fury erupted? No. Many progressives were of the school of social Darwinism. Even Theodore Roosevelt flirted with it. The idea that certain ways for society to work are better, and certain civilizations that do these things are better than other civilizations that do not do these things. And so eugenics was common in the progressive movement. You can't mitigate the extreme negativity of Woodrow Wilson's presidency and instead amplify the low amounts of negatives the presidents did to say, I don't do that. I certainly don't do that. I don't know what you're talking about. I talk about his negatives and I talk about some of the good things he did because I do that with every single U.S. president. I'm not as harsh on Nixon, Grant, Wilson, or Harding, or Bill Clinton as a lot of people would want me to be, because I look at the entire picture of who they were and what they did. Colombia sold Panama for a few coins, the saddest history I have ever learned. Well, the United States started a revolution in Panama to overthrow the Colombian government there, or helped start a revolution. Theodore Roosevelt did that, just to build the Panama Canal. So, is INRI in the Bible? Isn't that in Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, in Latin? It's ironic, actually. There is a bit of UK World War II debt that is in limbo, where the U.S. don't request it back, and the British never restated payments after the mess of the 1970s. So I like how it's bad when America doesn't repay its debts, but it's good. But it's ironic when Britain doesn't. You just said Woodrow Wilson did do a lot of bad things, but they weren't as bad as the impact of limited amount of negative things. A civil war, Dred Scott, trying to force Kansas to accept slavery, throwing the nation into utter chaos is worse than anything Woodrow Wilson did. Destroying Reconstruction, pardoning the Confederate slaveholders, discriminating against the blacks, allowing the Klan to run rampant through the South. Woodrow Wilson didn't do any of those things. He was not a great president. I mean, he didn't care about the Klan. He was clearly a racist. Birth of a Nation, first film at the White House. I'm not saying Woodrow Wilson's in my top 10. I'm saying that there are mitigating factors when I look at a Johnson and Buchanan that say they're significantly worse presidents than Woodrow Wilson and Richard Nixon and Ulysses S. Grant, who are bad presidents, and George W. Bush, who was a bad president. I'd say George W. Bush, Jimmy Carter, those guys should be in that conversation too. Bush ruined both the foreign policy of the United States and the economy when he was president. Carter couldn't get a single thing right when he was president, clearly, other than Israel maybe. Roosevelt or Lincoln were the best presidents. I would say Theodore Roosevelt, Lincoln, and Washington are always where I go for. I'm from the United States. I don't share more than that. Do you know much about Pancho Villa? A Mexican rebel was attacking southwestern territories in the United States around the time the Great War broke out and eventually got himself killed. I forget exactly who killed him. Thanks. Thanks for joining us, Esteban. God bless America, free speech. Well, we're free speech absolutists here, and if you like American history, Victor, you're in the right place because we just talked about the history of the labor movement and Labor Day. Can I email you my description of how bad Woodrow Wilson was with all the facts, and I can rely on you to read it someone by next Saturday maybe? Sure, I don't know. Yeah, surprise me. And you guys can email me at friendlyneighborhoodhistory@gmail.com if you want to have a longer, protracted conversation or you want to share something or some feedback. I'd always love to have a conversation with my friendly neighborhood historians. Look at the 1820s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s and tell me the British couldn't bully the U.S. Look at the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s and tell me the Americans couldn't bully the British. Actually, look at the 2020s and tell me the Americans couldn't bully the British. Your prime minister is getting bullied by the American president. You said so yourself, Harry. And Hassan, now you can say you got owned. There is a reason why the Reconstruction era ebbed. The constituents, for the most part, didn't improve the better livelihood of minorities. It would have been political suicide to hasten the process then. No, if Lincoln had lived, it would have worked out. And if Grant hadn't been corrupt, it probably still would have worked out. I did read your comment. Thank you, Victor. I appreciate you. The United Kingdom was the only country that survived the entirety of World War II. Which war? Which World War? Which one? The Great War or World War III? Because my World War II and your World War II are different. But, I mean, other than the United States, yeah. The Soviet Union, yeah. Survived the entirety. Oh, you mean from 39 to 45? Except that I don't think it started in 39. I think it started in 37, so China would be the only one to survive the entirety of it. And the United Kingdom was the one that would bankrupt fighting in World War II, so I would argue the British government had a very big contribution to victory in World War II. Of course they did. Absolutely. Do you like video games, friendly history? Yes, I do. When was free speech actually the most free, since it seems we're heading towards a more repressive future? Great question. I think, generally speaking, the last 60 years in American history, when you have civil rights laws, when you have open LGBTQ rights, America's tended to have the best free speech. That has become a big question mark with the advent of social media in the last 20 years. But I actually do think people have more freedom of speech now, especially freedom of expression, than they have had in the past. You have Supreme Court rulings that allow flag burning. You have Texas v. Johnson. You have Supreme Court rulings that allow people to um, uh, commit hate speech. And I don't like those things, but I think they're protected speech. Flag burning is a little bit more questionable because it's more of an action, and people who do not understand how executive orders are written and do not read the executive orders will quickly say that I'm condemning what President Trump did, and maybe I am, maybe I'm not. Inciting a riot, inciting violence is obviously not protected free speech. If flag burning does that, it's not free speech, but protected free speech. But those things were decided in the last few decades, where the American government basically said, "Yeah, you can say basically anything you want." Um, the idea that hate speech is not protected speech is absurdity. Um, but to be fair, that hostility was brewing because the war ended. Tom, we got we got given 1/3 of the western side of Berlin, so yes, the Union Jack flew over Berlin. That's fascinating. And your empire went the way of a dodo bird because of the Americans. You're welcome. Um, so yes, the USSR flew the flag over the eastern half, Hassan, because they got to the eastern half because they demanded to take over the eastern part of Berlin. They took over all the areas surrounding Berlin. The reason they got half of it was because Berlin was squarely in East Germany, and the other reason they got half is you don't have three different superpowers defeating them. So I'm going to side with Harry on this one and say you've got America, you've got the French, and you've got the British. So their occupied zones have to be divided into thirds. The Soviet area is just half of the city. So they don't have to divide it amongst other allies of theirs after the war. So yeah, let me see here. American government and the Soviet government and the British government were all essential. So yeah, let's see. Do we have any more questions? Let's see. Maybe I'm not seeing all the comments today. Nope, I didn't put in all messages. So let's see. L. Ron Hubbard was a black man. L. Ron Hubbard was a white man who was in the Navy. Get out of here, Hunter. How could I not be more wrong? Can you tell us about Indo-Soviet Treaty of Peace, Friendship, and Cooperation? Basically, during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, India experimented strongly with socialism. It wasn't part of the Soviet bloc, but it was definitely more sympathetic to the Soviets, and the Americans were doing double overtime to make sure they didn't become part of the Soviet sphere of influence. Basically, they were socialistic governments that were very sympathetic, very anti-colonial, very anti-Western. American school system in a nutshell. I love that, Christian. This idea of I don't know something because of an American school system when I don't know any. I'm not talking about American schools. I'm talking about what I have learned on my own through studying and reading things. Do you know how much equipment the British government provided to the Soviet Union as well? United Kingdom outproduced the Soviet Union every year. Absolutely. The Americans and the British basically gave the Soviets something for nothing, basically. The Soviets never paid it back. Do you like the fact the main purpose of USA is to serve Israel? Are you a good goyim? Well, other than the fact that you're a good troll who probably spends way too much time watching Nick Fuentes, no, I don't like that, and I don't think it's true. I do understand a lot of people wondering who's the satellite state of whom. I would still argue that overall, that Israel is a satellite state of the United States. And the American government did all of its logistic networks through the United Kingdom. Absolutely, the D-Day invasion happened through the United Kingdom. What did I forget about Yugoslavia? Just got sent here by a friend named Cherish. Looking forward to learning some history. Well, Fable, it's good to see you here. We're in our Q&A portion. We just finished our lecture on Labor Day. We'll go for about 5 more minutes answering questions about history and social studies, and then we're done. You can check out our long-form videos dropping every Monday and Friday at 8 Eastern, our shorts that drop every day. And not our closed shorts, but our short videos that drop every day. And our live stream lectures every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern, and our Q&As every Saturday and Friday. Ken Burns is coming out with a new documentary this year on the American Revolution, his dream project. What interesting story or aspect would you love to see included on it? I don't think we spend enough time talking about the Loyalists, and we don't talk enough time talking about the South and how the South was the key place of the American Revolution. So, Jack, I would want to see that. Let me see. Let's go for 2-digit number. Come on, simp again over British Savior Empire. Yes. Yes, Harry is a simp for the British Empire. He's allowed to do that, and even if you don't agree with it, he's got a lot of evidence to prove his points. And there are many things to like about the British Empire. And there's many things to dislike about the British Empire. The British created the Jewish state. Not quite. The British simply recognized in the Balfour Declaration that there should be a Jewish state in Palestine. That's it. The Jews and the Palestinians and Arabs were living there couldn't make an agreement, and eventually this led to the Arab-Israeli War of 1948. Right after Israel declared itself to be a nation, they had offered half of the land to the Palestinians. The Palestinians had refused it. They were immediately attacked from all sides by all sorts of different Middle Eastern enemies. They repelled the attacks and pushed the Palestinians out of their areas. The Jews in those Arab countries, in those Middle Eastern countries, were then expelled to go live in Israel, and the Palestinians became refugees, with no Middle Eastern country ever accepting them, and a continual demand for land and area within that area being demanded. The West Bank did not belong to them at the time. Gaza did not belong to them at the time. The Israelis did not control these areas either. The Israelis, if I'm correct, didn't even control all of Jerusalem until 67. I'm interested in geopolitics. Yes, I talk about geopolitics on this channel all the time. My arrogance. Have you met yourself? Exactly. I just think the man, Woodrow Wilson, who took ideologically unstable era that had a lot of advancements in the positive direction, destroyed all of it, is the worst president. No. I think that I look at what happens right after his presidency, and I say things weren't great after Wilson left office, but we didn't have a civil war. So yeah. And Hassan, behave yourself. You're just getting you give Harry crap all the time, and it needs to stop. And I like a lot of what you have to say, Hassan, but you're just literally here just to own Harry, and it's getting tired. Lawrence of Arabia? What? Lawrence of Arabia. C.E. Lawrence was a British officer who became sympathetic to the plight of the Arabs, and the British used the Arabs to destroy the Ottoman Empire. Yeah, let me see. So we're just over an hour. We're going to wrap it up. Joshua, great to see you. Yes, please, like the stream. Christian, I'm still waiting for an explanation. Can't we talk about World War II without mentioning Yugoslavia? All the Balkan partisans except Croatia that defend. Yes, the Yugoslavian partisans, I forget one of their leaders' names, but the other one was Tito, did an excellent job. And it's not just Yugoslavia, but it's that whole area, the Croats and all of these different people, actually unified, despite their many different oppositions to each other, to overthrow and destroy the Nazis, to continue to be a fingers in the ribs of the Nazi Wehrmacht and oppressive regime. You cannot tell the story of the last World War, what I call World War III, without the Yugoslavians and without the rise of Josip Tito, who was not only able to corral the different ethnic interests in that area during that time, but when he was the dictator as well. So yes, you can certainly talk about it. But saying that I don't know about my history because I didn't mention it because I'm not talking about it specifically is not fair. So yes, you got what you wanted. Let me see. We actually wanted to set up a Jewish state in Jordan, but the Hashemite family basically bought it off of. Yes, the British were going to give Jordan to the Arabs, the Palestinians, and the Hashemites swooped in and bought it. And again, this isn't to say Israel has done everything right, because they certainly haven't. Look at this war right now. But something that nobody talks about in their historiographical understanding of the Arab-Israeli-Palestinian crisis is the horrible treatment of the Palestinians by the Lebanese, the Egyptians, and the Jordanians. And the fear of radical terrorism from Hamas is why the Egyptians shut off their border and let Gazan children die. And I'm saying it that harshly because that's exactly how harshly we talk about how Israel has acted in the war. So yeah, there you go. How to convince people Hellenism is a valid religion. I don't think many people believe in Hellenism. I think people look at Greek mythology and just like it because of how interesting it is, because it tells us these complex, interesting stories about ourselves. Greek gods are not supposed to be divinities that are all powerful like an Abrahamic religion. They're more like superheroes. Man presidency, which was Cone Hardest. Okay, I get it, Hars. You don't like Woodrow Wilson. So we didn't actually want to put them in Palestine in the first place. Well, that's kind of true, but at the same time, the British were okay with them being there. They were already going there long before Alfred Balfour, long before the Great War, the Second World War. What's your opinion of Mamdani in New York? It's an interesting development that New York would elect a Muslim mayor 25 years after 9/11. But I think people who say that are trying to just say all Muslims are like the people from 9/11, which is absolutely absurd and crazy. Mamdani is a gay rights activist. He has shown some support for defunding the police in the past. He has said some things that are kind of controversial because of where they are where they're saying the word like globalize the intifada. But I don't see him as a radical Muslim. I don't see any of that. I see him more of a socialistic mayor who wants socialist policies, and he happens to be Muslim. I don't see him. I don't see them trying to bring Sharia law to the United States. I see it much more of a socialistic, multicultural understanding of how America is supposed to be run. That's what I think of him. And we haven't seen someone quite like that in American history. It's kind of taking it's the children of Bernie Sanders on the American left who have risen to prominence. You might have the mayor of New York. You have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who probably will run for president. You've got Ilhan Omar. You've got these people who have definitely been informed by democratic socialism on how to understand American and world politics. It's quite interesting. Arab countries treat Palestinians like garbage. Yes, and nobody says it. My problem isn't that it happens, it's that nobody says it. He also destabilized the nation after the progressive era to push regressive authoritarianism towards being an issue until right now. Yeah, I agree with you, so yes. What do you think of Israel killing 36 Americans and injuring almost 200 in 1960-something, and America did nothing? Is it not weird? America just so tough on everyone, bow down to Israel only. America is selectively tough. America was not tough on what America gave weapons to Mao and helped him rise to power. America gave weapons to bin Laden and helped the Taliban rise to power. Indirectly. America is selective on when it wants to be the tough guy. That's absolutely true throughout its history. It's selectively tough on the British. It went hard after the British after the last World War to destabilize their empire after supporting their empire for a long time and helping them win 2 world wars. I do not believe for a second that you can look at American history and say that it's always tough on everyone. America chooses and picks its fights. The USS Liberty, which was in 1967, 67, not 60-something, it was an event where Israel used a false flag operation to try to get the United States to go to war with Egypt so they could seize more land from Egypt. They felt that they would need it in order to win the Six-Day War. They didn't. They still took over the Sinai Peninsula, and then Jimmy Carter made them give it back. So don't tell me that the Americans aren't always not tough on Israel. There are plenty of examples in American history where America hasn't always been as sympathetic to Israel as it could be. Now, many presidents have basically just bent over backwards for Israel. That's definitely true because they believe in the importance of having a democratic state in the Middle East be a satellite of American interest in that area. You are surrounded by countries that not only hate Israel but hate the United States. You have an extremely high Jewish population that is extremely politically active, especially on the Democratic side. You also have evangelical Christians voting for Republicans with the ideas of Israel in the end times. There are so many different geopolitical and social factors as to why America does support Israel as much as it does. And I have talked about them all ad nauseum on this channel. So you may not have heard me talk about that before, Atto, but the truth of the matter is, yes, it is a terrible moment. It is an awful thing. It is something that deserves recompense to some extent or another, whatever that looks like, probably some sort of financial restitution. I'm not, at least that's what the eye test tells me. When I look at the history and geopolitical situation that happens there, I see American allies trying to get America to do things that America doesn't want to do. The Suez Canal incident, where Israel, France, and Britain try to get the U.S. in there, is another example of that. Did you know you are handsome? I'd like to think so. I have no idea. That's up to you guys. Why is it often said that American Civil War defined America as a nation? Because it made America the country of all men are created equal. And once you say that, you have to apply it to women. You have to apply it to the other minorities. You have to apply it to people who are not straight. You have to keep applying it. And so he created this concentric circle of application, not just towards black men, but towards women women of color, and towards other people of minority status. Let me see. I think we're going to wrap up here. I think socialism is going to be used as a form of economic terrorism. Okay, immigration is good for America or bad. You can't tell the story of American history without immigration. And let me just say this. The narratives that immigrants come and steal their jobs and commit crime existed we talked about immigration on the live stream. Since there have been immigrants coming to the United States, there has been that narrative. You can't get away from it. It's ironic as well because he doesn't actually know the meaning of the words got owned, because you can't get owned. You can only get owned if you are proved factually wrong, so he doesn't even understand the basic phrase yet he thinks he's very clever when he says it. Yes, get owned. Can you please talk about Anglo-Saxons? Okay, good to see you again, Memo Master, Mem Master, but Me Master? Me Master. But we're running out of time. The Anglo-Saxons were a Germanic group that eventually settled and conquered large swathes of England in the 5th and 6th centuries. If he had John Bolton as a president, he wouldn't be cherry-picking on countries to be tough on. He'd be invading all of them. Why Marxism could not take place in highly industrialized countries? Because the workers of the world were not uniting. Unions, collective bargaining, meeting in the middle, capital deepening, all of these things prevented Marxism because laborers got what they needed. And Marx was incorrect in thinking that money and ownership was what the laborers wanted. They just wanted decent treatment. When they got that, they didn't find the need for communism. One of the reasons people have argued that there was people on the progressive side who fought hard for workers' rights was because they didn't want a socialist revolution in their country. Can you explain why there was a time when most black people and also Jim Crow people were voting for the same political party, like how Democratic Party had both voting bases at the same time? Blacks were heavily Republican until the 1930s when the FDR coalition happened. And the FDR coalition combined Southern racist Dixiecrats, where Roosevelt basically appeased them by being pretty racist himself. Nobody talks about it, but it's true. Combined with African Americans who liked the New Deal programs, combined with, blue-collar steel workers and immigrants who usually voted Democratic and depended on the unions. So you have all of these coalitions built that didn't really fall apart until the 1960s, and so that's why you've got Dixiecrats and blacks in the South voting Democratic for different reasons. Hello, Salinger. Thank you for being a good content creator. It's the best I can. I know I have defeated friendly history when he ignores my comment about the topic we've been talking about. No, yes, that's hilarious. Or maybe he's just gotten tired of owning you, so he's done. He's over it. I get it. You don't like Woodrow Wilson. I don't agree. Can we move on now? Is this the only darn thing we're going to talk about on this channel now is Woodrow Wilson and James Polk? Is there anything else in history? Is there anything that we can agree on? You and I agree on so much else in history. This is absurd that this is all we go over on. Are we still talking about Woodrow Wilson? Are we still talking about James Polk? There, I had to do the Trump thing for it. How and why Roman Empire converted to Christianity. Higher birth rates amongst Christians, lower birth rates, but at least have a... Are you kidding me? Are you kidding? Are you for real right now? Sorry, Fars. Let me get back. I'm getting distracted. Higher birth rates amongst Christians, low birth rates among Roman pagans. Christianity continually being a force for charity and good in the Roman Empire tended to get a lot of sympathy from a lot of people. Okay. Hearts. I've had so many conversations with you about this. There are 28 other people in this chat. There are other questions and other people who are bringing up different things. Do you think I would make a good British prime minister in the 1860s? Yes, the British would have loved a national socialist in the 1860s. Why Christian and the army did convert? That's true. All right, hi Marcus. For real, can you tell me about a time in which people admired Muslims? The Jews loved living under Muslim rule during the Abbasid Caliphate, the Islamic Golden Age in the 9th and 10th centuries. Why Christianity caused paganism to extinct, but not Judaism? They definitely did what they could to squash Judaism. Judaism was so multinational that there was no way Christianity was going to destroy it. Basically, Judaism tended to be at least some sort of tacit admission that Judaism and Christianity had a similar set of beliefs. So whereas the pagans needed to become Christians, they knew the Jews weren't going to become Christians. They also knew that Christianity would not exist without Judaism. So there was some sort of salutation to Judaism. But once in a while, you decided, we don't care about that. We're just going to do horrible things to you. I know, but I'm trying to understand, and ignoring it isn't having a conversation. I get what you're saying. I really, really do. I agree with some of it. But you do not understand that there is a difference between not liking someone and thinking they're the worst. Yes, I would vote for Harry for prime minister. I don't know his. This is sort of a one-way combo. I don't vote. I'll be honest about how I vote. I don't vote based on politics alone. I don't vote based on what I think is going to work. I vote about what I think someone's going to do, what the opposite person's going to do, and what it will look like. And I try to be as practical as I possibly can. Okay, let's ask this question. America lost hegemony of the world in China in 10 years, going to be unstoppable. What USA is playing? We Europeans don't really know, so we wait open to swap for China. What do you think? I think that I've said that the U.S. has had a hegemony over Europe for a long time, and Harry would confirm that in a bad way. China is doing its own hegemonic thing through BRICS. I think that China is going to continue to be ascendant, and the United States realizes that it's not going to stop China from being ascendant, so it needs to either curtail China's allies and hopefully, in the American mind, strengthen its own predominance in the world and cut off its dependence on Chinese goods and Chinese information. Hitler liked Islam and he wished that Europeans were Muslim. That's true. Do you think the main three religions are based on the same source material? No. Islam is based on the Quran. Christianity and Judaism are based on two different parts of the Bible. Judaism is obviously the Tanakh, but it also has the Talmud. Christianity has the Old Testament, the Tanakh, and the New Testament. If anything is close, it's Christianity and Judaism, at least when it comes to sacred religious books. Islam obviously claims that all of the different Old Testament prophets and all of the New Testament writings point to Allah and point to Muhammad being his only prophet. So, good question. Does America first involve their practice in hegemony? If you disagree, please explain your position. It's difficult because a lot of the America First people are isolationists and don't care about the hegemony. But I think that Trump himself is a very hegemonic force. He understands that foreign policy requires American hegemony if he's going to be America First. So it's this question of how much foreign intervention are you going to do? If you're going to do a lot, then you probably are going to be a little bit. You're going to be an American First who believes in in intervention to some extent. Um, you familiar with Baha'i religion, fourth Abrahamic religion? I think invented in the 19th century. I don't know a huge amount about it. From Iran originally. You can't vote on someone on what they might do without evaluating the makeup of Congress. That's true too. There's so many different factors. We're talking about prime minister though. So prime minister is voting for the majority party, and then they elect their leader. So you do vote on the policy or the outcome of the promises. I vote on both. I vote on everything. And the main thing I vote on is history. What do I know about history? How do I compare this election to other previous elections in history? And what does that tell me about the candidates in question? And their own personal history and the history of knowing them. What's going to be fascinating when the 2028 presidential election happens, you're going to have two new faces. And there's going to be a lot of history, but there's not going to be any presidential experience. There's not going to be any oval. I mean, you might have the vice president on one ticket, so there's that, I guess. But whatever. It's going to be different, is what I'm saying. Okay, let's wrap up. Fun fact, whoever wrote the Quran didn't understand Christianity or Judaism. I tend to think Muhammad did not write the Quran. Friendly history, I don't think you understand the weight meaning and when Wilson did all of the evil things. Yes, Wilson did evil things. We agree. Can we move on now? Are we still talking about Woodrow Wilson? Why does it matter what I think about Woodrow Wilson? I do not have to be perfect, and you do not have to be perfect. So, and you guys don't have to be perfect out there, but I appreciate Vance is going to be in the same boat Kamala was in 2024. How you distance yourself from the last administration while still being VP of it. I don't think he's going to want to distance himself. I think he's going to double down. I think he's even more of the isolationist America First side than Trump is. And I think he's going to be like, look at what we've done. It works. I'm not going to argue about it. Vote for me. That's what he's going to do. Unless there's some sort of major collapse of the American economy or major war, I don't think he's going to try to run away from that agenda. So yeah. If you are spewing a false view about the worst president ever, I'm sorry, but I don't agree that he's the worst president ever. I don't have a false view about it. I think you just hate him. Can you please quickly explain how the British executive is elected, because it is very different to how the American executive works, for the Americans in the chat so they know we're on about. I hope I have this right. The party, British general elections, it's similar to how the House of Representatives works in the United States, but the primary elections, you get members, MPs elected. The majority MP party will then select a particular government. The government will have a prime minister and his cabinet. That prime minister is elected by the MPs. He's not directly elected by the people like the president is. But, well, the president is even directly elected. But the MPs vote of the major party will vote on the prime minister, which is exactly how the Speaker of the House works in the United States. Except the Speaker doesn't select a cabinet, is not the head of the government. So there are differences. And there's Simon the Bunny. Great to see you. Your opinion on the top 5 U.S. presidents. I'll finish with this, Tom. And I'm so glad that we lasted long enough for Simon to get here. It's always great to see you. And Hars, we're just going to have to disagree on Woodrow Wilson being the worst ever. It's not that you can think I'm spreading the false view, but hammering it home isn't going to make me change my mind. The top 5 U.S. presidents are not those guys. The top 5 U.S. presidents are Lincoln, Washington, Theodore Roosevelt, Thomas Jefferson, and it always goes back and forth for me, but today I'm feeling Reagan at number 5 instead of Kennedy. Can you tell Trump Putin is not his friend? I think Trump learned that kind of the hard way. Okay, let me see. Yes, African Americans are more Western than they are African. Another big difference is our executive gets its legitimacy from the legislature and needs support of the legislature and all the governing legislature. Yes, which is why a government can collapse. A prime minister can stop being prime minister, and then but you still have the conservative party can put up another prime minister. You had all the different prime ministers the conservatives had until you got to Starmer. So, do you know there is no evidence Muhammad existed? Okay, go watch my videos on Islam. We can't talk about this too much more. I'm going to wrap it up. I once again went over about 15 minutes just to talk to you guys and answer all of your questions. But thank you so much for participating. I really appreciate all of you. And Hearts, send me your rant about Woodrow Wilson, and I will read it in the chat next Friday. People can listen to different perspectives. You're not just required to believe what I believe about history. I am sharing a factual opinion, but I'm not right about everything. Okay. Thank you very much, Simon. I really appreciate you doing that. So do you think USA may be planning war before 2035? It's logical. No, I don't think so. I think America is actually pointing away from it. So, you have no standard for your ranking friendly history. Neither do you. And ending with a Gavin Newsom-like tweet doesn't make you more right than I am. Take care. Have a happy Labor Day. Hope you enjoyed this video. Check out all the content here on the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. Like and subscribe on your way out. Have a great rest of your week. We'll see you back here Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern for another Q&A. And make sure to, again, like and subscribe. And as always, more than anything, love history. Bye-bye now.